never stands on golden sand.
Hello and welcome to the In the Tank podcast, episode 215, the podcast that explores work of think tanks across the country, as always, with the exception of last week. I am your host, Donald Kendall, and joining me today, we have Justin Haskins. He is the editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I am doing really well, Donald. And actually, I don't know if you listened to the podcast last week.
I did.
When you weren't on. You did listen to it.
Yeah.
So last week, Isaac did a pretty good impression of you, I think.
Wasn't bad.
Wasn't bad. It was pretty good. Come on. It was pretty good. And my favorite part was when he introduced me, he actually gave me the wrong title when he introduced me, which I don't think was intentional, but he unintentionally did a classic Donnie move and gave me the wrong title.
I haven't made that mistake in a while, right? I almost do. It's gotten to the point where I'm like not sure if the right one is the wrong one at this point. So, but I've been pretty good, so I'll give kudos to myself. Also joining us, and it was a pretty good episode, I must say. I thought the topics that you covered, I wanted to jump in at certain points, and I realized I was just listening to it on my phone, so I couldn't. But it was a pretty good episode. I thought you guys did okay without me. Certainly, replacing me is really tough, so you guys couldn't get it all the way to the line, but you did an all right job. I'll give Isaac kudos. Yeah, serviceable. Yeah. Don't know about Jim, though. Might have to kick him to the curb. Also joining us is nobody, because our general people that are on this show, which is Jim Lakely, Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. He is at SPN, which is the State Policy Network Conference, which is taking place right now in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And with him is Isaac Orr, Policy Fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. He is also there. And we are waiting to see whether or not he won his award. So I don't know if constant listeners, if you're aware, Isaac Orr had a piece of research. His study that he did earlier in this year was put up for an award at SPN, the Bob Williams Award for Academic Achievement. And his study, which is doubling down on failure, is going for the Most Influential Research Award. So we'll have to check in with Isaac. Do you think he'll win?
Who knows?
We're taking bets, folks. We are taking bets. Hopefully, I know that Justin was voting for Isaac's competitors, but we'll see if the rest of our fan base was able to counteract that.
Don't forget that if Isaac wins, Jim is supposed to stand up and boo him. He agreed to do that last week, and he agreed that he would record it as well. So if it didn't if it turns out Isaac won and Jim did not boo him, he needs to be shamed.
Publicly shamed, yes.
Publicly shamed.
We'll get the stocks out.
Absolutely.
So today we'll be talking about a little bit of Halloween stuff. So Halloween was yesterday, but I'm still in the spirit a little bit, pun intended. But the look of it outside over here, I don't know what the weather's like with you, but it looks like Christmas outside here in the Midwest. A lot of snow outside. We got like 4 inches yesterday. It was crazy. But that's just typical, I guess. Maybe if we had some more global warming. How's it looking over there in Boston?
It's actually pretty nice. I think it was in the 60s or something yesterday. So global warming here is working out okay. Of course, we're all going to be swallowed up by the ocean, so that's a problem.
Thin.
But that's for another day. I'm not worried about that today.
Yeah, right. So we'll talk about some Halloween stuff a little bit. We can get into some Elizabeth Warren has just released her plan for Medicare for all. And maybe if we have some time, we'll get into some social media stuff with AOC grilling Mark Zuckerberg and the like. So we'll see if we have time for that. But we do have the power of the internet, so why don't I try to reach out to our usual co-host, Isaac Orr, and see if he won. How about that? I might lose you here, Justin, but bear with me for a minute.
Hello.
It's Isaac Orr. How are you, good sir?
Oh, I'm doing great today, good sir. Did you listen to last week's episode?
I did.
Yeah, did you like that?
I did. Yes, you took my advice immediately. I was like, just Jim's gonna try to run it. Just take control of it and do the intro yourself, and you definitely did.
Yeah, it was great. Because Jim was like, "Oh, hello," like he was trying to do it. I'm like, no. Like I've been practicing. Let's do this.
Yes. Yep. Good job on that for sure. But the reason I'm calling is not to talk about last week's episode, but it's to talk about you at SPN. So don't leave us in suspense. How'd it go? Did you win the Bob Williams Award?
Won.
You won.
We won the Bob Williams Award for most influential research. So thank you to everyone at the In the Tank listenership for the hours of voting that I know you all put in. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Bob Williams Award for Outstanding Policy Achievement. And there was a couple of different awards, and you won the most influential research. So what was the name of your study? And, elevator pitch it for us again.
Oh, yeah. It was called Doubling Down on Failure, How a 50% by 2030 Renewable Energy would cost Minnesota $80 billion. So basically, Minnesota already has a 25% renewable energy mandate. So it's just kind of a fun way to convey that, hey, we're doubling down on something that's really bad.
Right. So it says most influential research. So how was the influence? I mean, was there actually some tangible results from your thing here?
It was the most. Well, so seriously though, in the legislature, they were proposing a 100% carbon-free mandate by 2050. And all the other people who were testifying in these hearings, they were awful. They were saying how this is going to save people money and this is going to be the best thing since sliced bread.
Right.
But then you have to think, like, why is it mandatory then? Like, why do electricity bills keep rising? So we were really the only organization that was taking a very aggressive stance publicly against this. And I think that we helped not only get some Republicans who may have been on the fence about this to reconsider their position, but also some Democrats. So that was great.
Awesome. So actually take us to the event. SPN, you're at SPN. That's being held in Colorado Springs, right?
Correct. Yep, at the Broadmoor Resort.
So then how do they...
Very nice, by the way.
So then how do they do it? Did they do it like Oscars? Did they have a drum roll? Did somebody up there with an envelope, they tear it open and you wait for your name to be said?
Yeah, actually. So they had like videos briefly going through like each of the projects. So I think it was also the Empire Center and the Mackinac Center for Public Policy that had projects that were up for this award. So they did like a brief video about each one. They had a little video about our study. And then, Todd Davidson just opens up the envelope and says, all right, it's Center of the American Experiment. And then we had to act like we were surprised. Like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? Because we've known for about a month.
What?
We were just asked to keep it on the down low.
You knew for a month? You didn't tell me? Come on.
And I couldn't. I swore to secrecy.
All right. Well, we know that you keep your word then. Did you have to do an acceptance
Didn't
speech?
I heavily imply at one point, though?
You did, but I just thought you were being overconfident.
Oh, sure.
Did you have to do an acceptance speech?
No, there was no time for that. So basically, you go up and you shake a couple hands, and then they hook you off the stage. So, yeah.
All right. That's
still
fun.
good. Still good.
So, are you going to follow up with it next year? You got tripling down on failure? The sequel. The sequel.
So, I think that what we're going to look at is how much it would cost to completely eliminate fossil fuels from Minnesota's electric grid using wind, solar, and battery storage. So there have been a few engineers that have reached out to us after reading our report and our findings saying, hey, we're happy that you guys are talking about this because nobody else is. So those people have a little bit more experience with the battery storage side of things. And it's going to be, if you thought 80 billion was big, hold on to your butts, people, because 100% with wind, solar, and batteries is going to be off the charts.
Fantastic. Well, something to look forward to. I also caught the Jurassic Park reference there, so don't think that went unappreciated. And then moving forward, when I introduce you on the podcast, I'm going to have to say Policy Fellow at the Center of the American Experiment and a Bob Williams Award winner. Isaac Orr. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds way better than executive editor at the Heartland Institute. So I'm happy about that.
All right, fantastic. Isaac Orr, do you have anything else to say before I let you go? I know that you're got a plane to catch here.
Just unfollow Justin at Justin T. Haskins on Twitter.
That was your whole like award acceptance speech. You just go up there.
Yeah, that was it actually. Yeah, just spiking the trophy and saying Justin Haskins is a clickbait fraud. Unfollow him on Twitter.
All right, fantastic. Good, sir. Catch your plane. Thank you for hopping on for these just 5-6 minutes, and probably talk to you next week.
Yeah, next week.
All right, bye-bye. Boom. All right. Well, there you go, Justin. You're back on. Isaac won his award. You know, let's give an applause to him. Good job.
Good job, Isaac.
Good job.
Way to go. We didn't find out if Jim booed him though.
Oh shoot, I forgot to ask. We'll have to wait until next week.
We didn't find out if he booed him. So that's we have to find out. We have to. Because he made such a big deal out of it. Like he was gonna be so cool and stand up and boo Isaac. And we all know he's not going to do that.
I don't know if you heard, I don't know if you could hear when I was talking to Isaac, but he did reference you as executive editor. So he got your title wrong even then.
Of course he did.
But yep, great job. Bob Williams Award for academic achievement in research. Great job, Isaac. We'll talk to you next week when you get back in here. But why don't we get to our topics at hand? Halloween, sir. Did you do anything for Halloween?
No.
Any parties?
I don't think we've ever talked about. Have we ever talked about Halloween?
I don't
know
so.
if we've ever talked about Halloween. I am pretty anti-Halloween.
What?
I hate Halloween.
Why?
Yeah, I've always hated Halloween. I hated it
Always?
as a kid. I was that kid who even when I was 10 years old hated Halloween. Wanted nothing to do with it.
It's because,
nothing at all.
Because you're a Puritan, or what's your reason?
It's not because it's not because I'm a Puritan. There are other things related to that, but that's not one of my puritanical beliefs. It was just, to be honest, I don't know why. I just never liked it. I don't like dressing up in costumes.
Sure.
I feel stupid, and I felt stupid even as a kid. I thought it was the dumbest thing ever. I got dragged to a lot of Halloween things as a kid, and I would always literally go as a Red Sox player. That was my one costume for like 10 years in a row. It was Red Sox player.
Okay.
It was interesting because where I grew up in the middle of nowhere in New Hampshire. And so people get really into Halloween in that part of the country.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're not that far from Salem. Like
yeah.
Salem witch stuff is like a really big deal. I actually grew up, my house is, I grew up in a really rural town. My house was in the middle of the forest.
On a Indian burial ground or
not an Indian, no, but let me tell my story about Halloween. All right.
All right.
So I grew up in this house that was in the middle of the forest.
God,
and
this is a scary story. This is a scary. You're like, this is a prelude to like a scary story. This is great.
Well, kind of. The house was in the middle of the forest.
Ooh.
It was a quarter of a mile. My driveway was a quarter of a mile long. And so you didn't have any neighbors. You're like literally in the middle of the forest, no street lights. So it was very dark and kind of like a spooky place. We never got trick-or-treaters ever. No, I think literally the entire time I grew up, there was one person that came down there for trick-or-treating, like one person. And across the street from my driveway was a gigantic old graveyard, like from the 1700s, It's huge. And so, I mean, it was like a perfect Halloween setting. Like my life was like a Halloween setting growing up. It was really creepy all the time, all the way around my house. It's really creepy. Uh-huh. Everybody was super into Halloween, and I always hated it. I don't know, just rebellion against the common culture or something. I don't know. I really hated it though, my whole life. Also, I don't like candy that much, so that didn't help.
I have nothing to do with these scary effect noises that are going on. This is just part of your story, I think.
You do realize it's November 1st, right?
You're crazy.
I only had to suffer through Halloween once a year.
All right.
I don't need to make it too easy.
You're crazy. Halloween was great. That was like the that was like Christmas for kids, other than Christmas, obviously. You get to run around, collect candy. It's a great thing. You're crazy.
Yeah,
you're the outlier for sure.
I don't really like candy that much. Also, you're from the suburbs. So for you, like Halloween probably was great because you go to all these neighborhoods, and you get candy and it's like a fun experience. Like where I grew up, there are no neighborhoods. It's trees. So if you want to go trick or treating, you got to walk like miles to go trick or treating. You might walk 2 miles and hit 10 houses. So it's miserable.
Your hatred for Halloween really kind of stunts my intro to this section about Halloween because usually people like it, and I was going to talk about how the left apparently doesn't, and all of the things that are kind of attacking Halloween from an environmental perspective, but you'll probably be in favor of some of these things. So the article that I have in front of me is called "Is It Time to Ban Halloween Candy?" So you actually sent this to me. But I wanted to go through it because there's some interesting stuff here, and I think it'll lead to a kind of a interesting conversation. But it starts off and it says, public awareness of our plastic pollution crisis is at a high. Plastic straws and bags are getting banned in cities and states across the country. And yet there has been almost no discussion about the massive environmental problem that Halloween candy creates. So first off, there's 2 things to address in there. Plastic straws. We've talked about this before, but just a recap, like 95% of the plastic in the oceans comes from like 3 or 4 Asian countries. I think China is like more than half of it alone. Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, all major contributors to this idea. So a lot of these countries just dump their trash in the water. Like that's literally what they do. The United States accounts for like less than 1% of that. Bags, banning plastic bags. We've talked about this a million times. You'd have to use a reusable grocery bag like 2,000 times to offset any type of carbon dioxide emissions or whatever. So, I mean, you start off, we're 7 words into this this article, and we're already kind of having to fact check some of this stuff. So it's not a good sign. But it goes through, it says Americans will buy approximately 600 million pounds of Halloween candy this year, spending $2.6 billion on bite-sized candy bars and bags of candy corn. Candy corn's the worst, by the way. After the holiday, nearly all the wrappers and packagings for these confections will end up in landfills, where they'll sit around for decades or more. So then it kind of goes through and talks about how the candy wrappers are like coated in this waxy poly coating, which is kind of like a plastic apparently, and it makes it very difficult for recycling. Apparently you can't just throw it in the recycling bin with the rest of your paper or whatever. So then the next like several paragraphs are talking about different solutions. It says a municipal county program encourage residents to throw these flexible packaging or plastics, including candy wrappers, into the recycling bin. Certain recycling facilities need to upgrade their equipment. There are certain groups, recycling companies, including TerraCycle and Rubicon Global, which have launched programs called Trick or Trash, which offers free recycling bins specifically for this type of garbage. And in fact, there's been overwhelming demand from like school districts for these specific recycling bins to get rid of this trash. So it doesn't get until like almost the end of the article where they actually start talking about banning unrecyclable food packaging. Not only candy wrappers, but also including that. First off, what is your thoughts on that? Before we get into some of my other overarching questions here. For the sake of the planet and not filling up landfills, is it time to ban Halloween candy, Justin?
I think, yeah. Absolutely. You didn't see that
coming. You were the worst.
No, I don't. I don't think we should ban Halloween candy. I think it's totally insane that we would actually do this. I think this is just another example of the left using holidays or using other sorts of news hooks to try to impose their will on the rest of society and just ruin fun for everyone. Every single human being on the planet. They just hate fun. They hate anything that has to do with fun. Now, I think Halloween is not fun personally, as I've already explained. But I recognize fully that millions and millions and millions of people do enjoy Halloween.
Yeah,
and
normal
the
people.
Prospect
That's what they're called.
And the prospect of having all of these kids, having to suffer through, I don't know. I mean, what's the alternative here? Some sustainable. Now we have to have sustainable Halloween or something. Like what does that look like? Everybody gets baked goods and tomatoes and something. I mean, what do you get when you go trick or treating in a sustainable Halloween?
According to this author, he is in a zero waste Facebook group. And he asked folks for alternatives to Halloween candy wrapper hell.
So these are the people who, when you go to their house, every kid on the block knows, like, this is the house you avoid because it's like the worst house ever. You don't want to go there. That's a waste of time.
Well, several members said that they went out of their way to hand out plastic-free treats, including playing cards made from paper, compostable chewing gum from a plastic-free store, or classic Halloween favorites that come in paper containers like Nerds, Lemonheads, and Milk Duds. So they don't take all the fun out of it.
So more paper containers. So what we need is to destroy more trees. That's what's going to save Halloween, right?
Yeah.
We just destroy more trees. See, this is the thing. I mean, but with the left, whenever they come up with one of these solutions, inevitably what will happen is they'll get a bunch of people to go along with this someday. Maybe they get a bunch of people to go along with this and say, you know what, only paper boxes. We're never going to get rid of Halloween, folks. That's never going to happen.
No.
But maybe we can all switch to paper boxes.
Sure.
So now all the candy companies say no more plastic, only paper, right?
Right.
Now, as you already explained, that's not really going to do anything ultimately, because the problem with plastics in the oceans and other things really has to do with other countries. It's really not an American problem per se.
Yeah.
However, if you want to do paper's easier to recycle, fine. Okay, great. But then you're going to have all these people mad that we're destroying all these trees. This is going to be 20 years into the future. So then there's going to be some massive rebellion movement to get rid of all the paper boxes so that we can save the trees.
Yep.
And then we'll be putting them into something else. And what's really interesting about this is the homemade stuff, like these suggestions that, you just make homemade goods and give that away. Like 30 or 40 years ago, it was really popular it was not popular, but it was a common concern among parents that their kids were taking home homemade things that were not in wrap items, because they were worried that there were people poisoning kids and putting razor blades in the apples and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So basically what I'm gathering is, if you want to be really sustainable and make your own goods and not put them in plastic or paper, then you are dangerous and no one will want to buy them from you because you could be poisoning or killing kids with razor blades. If you do use paper boxes, then that's better for the oceans because you're not throwing lots of plastic in the ocean or whatever, but you're destroying trees. So you're a tree killer. Uh-huh. So if you want to save the planet and you don't want to be a basically known as, potential kid killer, then I guess what you have to do is go back to plastic.
Well,
you can't win. So no matter what, you're killing somebody here, or you're potentially killing someone, or you're a potential danger to society. That's what I'm gathering.
So, I mean, a couple of things. So one is the idea of landfills. Okay. So I remember growing up and going through elementary school and them talking to us about, I remember like specifically, I don't know if it was like Bill Nye or something like that, but it was one of those stupid like kid-friendly science type things that they put on, when they roll in the cart with the TV into the room and everyone gets excited. And they talked about all of the packaging, all the waste that comes from these things that we buy every day, and how all of that waste has to go into garbage bags, and all those garbage bags end up in a landfill, and the landfill and then they'd show all these clips of all these landfills, and it was just, oh my gosh, we're all going to be living in piles of garbage if this continues. Like that's what it seemed like to me as third grade Donnie. But then, whatever, just like as grew up, I never really thought about it. And then like a couple of years ago, I was at this park. It was, in the suburbs over here. And we were walking around this park. And in the distance, and this is Illinois, so it's very flat. Everything's very flat. In the distance, at the total end of the park, there's like this mound. this big hilly mound, grassy mound or whatever. And I just thought, like, I wonder if that's a landfill. So I went home after we did our hike or whatever. I went home and I Googled it, and that was in fact a landfill. It was at one time it was a landfill. They covered it over with sod or whatever, and they grew grass on it, and now it just looks like a big old green grassy hill. And I thought, like, I am never going to be worried about landfills ever again. Because if that's the extent of it, where it's like, it's not an eyesore, it's just like a hilly, grassy mound over there in some park. Like, is that supposed to scare me? I wish third grade me could see that in the future, because I'm never going to care about that again.
Yeah, I think this comes back to I think this comes back to a fundamental issue that it really is it really is at the foundation of every difference between liberals and conservatives. Liberals are always trying to modify people's behaviors, no matter how painful that modification is.
Sure. In
order to accomplish some goal.
Right.
And it oftentimes modifies people's behavior in a way that makes life worse. Okay. Uh-huh. But they want to do it for some other higher, nobler goal, like saving the planet or whatever. And conservatives, I think, are more inclined to say, I think I can continue on with whatever activity I'm doing now, and we'll figure out some way to deal with whatever problems there are after the fact.
Right.
I'm not really worried about the problems. We'll deal with the problems as we go.
Yeah.
We're not going to create these big, gigantic, massive societal changes just so that we can try to solve this one relatively small problem in the grand scheme of things. So in other words, we're not going to ruin Halloween. We're not going to get rid of Halloween or Halloween candy because some of the plastic is causing a problem. Let's just deal with the plastic. Whereas liberals would say, well, the plastic is causing a problem, so let's get rid of all the plastic, not dealing with the issue of, well, how do you actually do that? They don't care. And I think you see that with everything. You see that definitely with global warming, right? I mean, you absolutely see that with global warming. If the planet warms, most conservative people say whatever's causing the warming, if the planet warms, we'll deal with it. Yeah. Like, we'll figure it out. It's not going to be a problem. Liberals say, no, we have to destroy our entire energy industry, our entire way of life. We have to do whatever we possibly can to try to avert this tiny amount of warming, because 80 years from now, it could cause massive problems. And so you see this with everything. Every problem that exists in society, it seems like what liberals want to do is try to force people to make these massive, gigantic, expensive changes to solve some sort of problem. And conservatives want to just try to deal with the problem and find a creative way to deal with that issue. Mm-hmm. And that is really, it's a recurring theme, but it's really obvious even with something as simple as this, with Halloween candy. It's big things like global warming, it's Halloween candy, it seems to be everything.
Right. Well, and that kind of brings me to another point, because when you sent me this article, and I will reveal who the source of this article or who published it in a minute here, but it reminded me of another story that we talked about. I think this was back when John was on the podcast, and it was probably around Halloween, at least in October or something. And we talked about this idea of, it was the Energy Department came out with these recommendations or whatever to lower your carbon footprint or something. It was like seasonally updated. And it was basically, it was about how pumpkins, the carving of pumpkins and the waste that's caused by your leftover jack-o'-lantern, when you throw it in the garbage, it releases all this methane, which is like 20 times more greenhouse gaseous than carbon dioxide or whatever, right? So it was basically, certain media outlets were kind of running with this and be like, oh, the Obama Energy Department is saying that we shouldn't carve pumpkins. And like, to a degree, that's clickbait, right? But I mean, it also kind of ties into this idea of just like what you were just talking about, how we have to like eliminate pumpkins because of the potential harms that it might cause or whatever. But so again, I'll discount that one as clickbait. But this one here, this article is from Huffington Post, which is a generally left-leaning media outlet, right? And like I was describing with the article, it's not until we get to the last 5 paragraphs where they start talking about the idea of banning these things. Everything else, 4/5 of this article, is about different ways that you could recycle, different ways that you could limit the amount of waste that you're doing by doing this trick-or-treating or whatever. It's not until the last 5 paragraphs, and even 2 of those last 5 paragraphs have nothing to do about this, but it's in that last bit where they actually talk about the idea of banning these things. So then why would Huffington Post choose to label or headline their article, "Is it time to ban Halloween candy?" I don't get it. Like that's,
Yeah.
I feel like that is just, like only hurting their cause.
Yeah, it is interesting that they have a tendency, not just on Huffington Post, but just in general, to lead with something that seems to be a really unpopular idea. And I really think it comes down to they're just stupid. I think they're just stupid. I think there's an element of the left, a lot of people on the left, really smart people, great people, whatever. But there are a certain segment of people on the left that really, truly, when it comes to understanding regular folks, are just stupid. And whatever desire they have to change the world, they get so caught up in trying to be the greenest person or the most woke person or whatever, that they forget that they're alienating like 95% of society by doing it.
I don't know,
And
man.
I
don't
really
know.
think that's what it is.
I feel like there's something else here, because like I could see, is it, like an article from, some right-leaning organization or whatever. Maybe it's like Breitbart or something. It's like the left wants to ban Halloween candy. And then they'll use these quotes from these people talking about banning it or whatever as proof of that, or like 2 tweets or something. This is Huffington Post saying it. This is Huffington Post. Like when we talked about the town hall, the climate change town hall, a 7-hour long thing where we did that whole episode about it or whatever.
Oh, I remember, yeah.
It's Elizabeth Warren, to all of her faults, she came out and said, like, this is what the opposing side wants us to be arguing about. They want us to be talking about plastic straws, and they want us to be talking about replacing light bulbs or whatever, when in reality we have to be talking about these big things like fossil fuel companies or whatever.
That's my point. Elizabeth Warren is basically saying we're stupid.
Right,
We're basically being stupid.
Yes.
And yet in the middle of a marathon of stupidity. And that's kind of my point.
Right.
How is it that the producers at CNN and all of the other candidates and all of the people who were covering it on the left that did cover it, why didn't they understand that?
Yeah. It's like, I would say she has a point if it were only us talking about how, the left, they want to ban straws. They're the ones that are saying this stuff. They're the ones that are talking about, switching to vegan diets. They're the ones that are talking about how you shouldn't have kids to save the planet. They're the ones that are talking about how you shouldn't have Christmas lights because of how wasteful they are. They're the ones that are talking about, composting your old food and waste, things that will have absolutely no effect on the global.
They do it because they genuinely believe that, I think the people who say those things genuinely believe they can convince society to change. Like, I genuinely think that they believe that. Like, they think that they can create this sustainable Halloween movement, or that they can create this other thing that's and you know what? They do it. They actually are successful a lot. I mean, most of the time they're not. But there are all kinds of things, all kinds of movements on the left or whatever that you look at and you say, well, this actually doesn't make any sense when you're looking at the data or whatever. I mean, how many times have I pointed out that for all of the things that are supposedly dangerous in society that they want to ban, they don't ever talk about banning alcohol? I mean, why?
Right.
Why is that? Why is it that on the left they have? No, go ahead.
I think that actually leads to my point. Like, why wouldn't they say that if they're so cavalier about saying all these other things that wouldn't fly in public?
Because they don't want to ban alcohol. That's why, because they're hypocrites. Okay. I mean, that's a totally different issue. We're talking about, why do they pick the cause? They have all these causes that they believe in.
A billion.
And the question that we're really asking is, why do they openly talk about those things when they know that there are a lot of people who will think they're crazy for even talking about that?
Right.
That's really the question.
Yeah.
And I think the reason is because the people who talk about them believe that those things have a chance of actually creating some kind of change. Look at e-cigarettes, right? Look at all the people shouting about e-cigarettes and how dangerous e-cigarettes are. In reality, that makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. We've talked about this a bunch of times. It doesn't make any sense. Practically nobody died. There's probably more people dying falling down the stairs or from peanut allergies every year than there are from e-cigarettes.
Undoubtedly.
And yet people are constantly talking now about banning e-cigarettes. So that actually kind of worked. Look at all of the leftist movements that demonize the police. And now I have all sorts of problems with police departments, don't get me wrong, but they created this whole movement based on this idea that there's this massive problem of police running around killing people all over the place. When the statistics show that's not really that big of a problem, statistically speaking.
Sure.
Same thing is true with school shootings, right?
Yeah.
They talk about school shootings. There's really not that many school shootings when you actually look at the data compared to how many people we have.
Sure.
So sometimes it works. It works. So I think they just throw a bunch of these things out there. And they believe that they're actually, this person who wrote this article for HuffPost was really proud of themselves. And they thought, you know what? I'm going to change. I'm going to start a movement that's going to change Halloween forever.
Well, I don't know about that. My theory on this particular article is that the author here turned in their article for publication, and the editor is just like, yeah, this title it's okay, recycle your candy wrappers. I don't know, I'm gonna slap something on there better. Is it time to ban Halloween candy? It was probably done specifically for the clicks, but like that doesn't explain away all of the things that I just laundry listed. There was one thing that we talked about, what was it, last week? Not on the podcast, just you and me, when we were talking about if you could pull it up, if you have it handy, it'd be great. But when they were talking about banning like traditional toilet paper, remember that?
Yeah.
Like
I don't think I have that.
How is that not counterproductive to their movement? Like,
I think meat is actually the better example.
Okay.
Because that was a big thing. Like a lot of these people were actively talking about, at the very least having government recommend people stop eating meat.
Yeah.
I mean, what were they thinking? Why would they do that? They know that most people eat meat. They know that that's not going to catch on, you would think. So why would they do it?
I just don't.
Even most Democrats eat meat. It doesn't make any sense on any level, really. That's why I go back to my original theory that some of these people are just stupid. They just truly do not understand how most of society thinks. And they think that they can convince them with some really,
is it like
well-written article about Halloween?
Is it like a self-imposed like purity test? Maybe that's another theory that I have. So when you've got like libertarians or something, and they're talking and they're espousing, the idea of limited government, and then they're always like asked that one stupid question: well, who's going to build the roads? And it's like, dude, we've got 1,000 million other problems that we would have to solve before we have to deal with privatizing roads. Like, get serious here. But like on the other end of the spectrum, it's like, we've got to do something about CO2 and climate change. It was like, oh yeah, well, what should we do about toilet paper? And then they're just taking the bait, I guess, and not just being like, we'll deal with that later.
I guess so. I actually think a lot of it is probably motivated by people who are involved in that, on that side of the aisle, feeling good about themselves for advocating for things that they think are going to make the world a better place.
Sure.
Like, I think it's probably mostly driven by an internal desire to not just a purity test, but an internal desire to feel like they're somehow contributing to the world. And that this person felt good about this. Even if nobody read this article, this person felt good about it because they said to themselves, I'm trying to make the planet greener, and I'm trying, I'm doing my part. And I think that's what a lot of this has to do with, just making people feel better.
I'm trying to think of what the response of like a liberal person listening to this would be. And they would probably respond with like, oh, I could pull up an article from some think tank talking about, how we can privatize roads. So doesn't that kind of counter your thing? But I think the big difference there is that if you were to find an article like that, it would be totally theoretical. It wouldn't be based in this idea of like, we have to privatize the roads now or else all of these people are going to die or something like that. Whereas this article is like, we have to ban Halloween candy or else turtles are going to choke on wrappers or something. It's like, we have to do this now. This isn't a theoretical, like, what are we going to do with Halloween candy once we outlaw plastics? It's not a theoretical thing like that. This is like a we have to do this now type of mindset. I don't know. It just seems counterproductive. I don't get it. I could just see like a liberal going through Huffington Post to find the latest news about like the Trump impeachment hearing or something like that, coming across this article and thinking like, am I on the wrong side? Like, it just seems counterproductive. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I get it.
All right. Well, let's move on to something probably even scarier, which is Elizabeth Warren just released her plan, her really fleshed out plan, apparently, for Medicare for all. So, Jay Mobile, you are big on the healthcare scene here when it comes to this type of stuff. So, walk us through this. What's going on in Elizabeth Warren's campaign?
Right. So if you've been following the Democratic Party race at all, then you know that this is one of the major issues is single-payer health care, Medicare for all. Are we going to do Medicare for all? Are we going to do a public option? Elizabeth Warren lately, especially in the last big presidential debate, was hammered pretty heavily because she refused to explain how she planned to pay for Medicare for all.
Right.
People like Mayor Pete and others were criticizing her. There are basically two camps in the Democratic Party right now. One wants a public option, basically. I'm simplifying, but one wants a public option and one wants a Medicare for all single-payer healthcare system where the government basically runs everything. They get rid of private health insurance and all of the healthcare spending money gets dumped into the federal government. And so both of them are problematic for a variety of reasons. But Elizabeth Warren is on the Medicare for all side. She's basically backed Bernie Sanders' plan, which has been around for a while. But Bernie Sanders and her, neither of them have really explained how they plan to pay for their plan. Mm-hmm. So I think that this comes from that. I think her coming out with this detailed plan. She came out with a very detailed plan actually on Friday, today, sort of spelling out how she plans to pay for it, exactly what her plan would look like. But before I get to some of the details of it, mm-hmm. Let me just first warn everybody that it is pretty detailed. It's full of lots of esoteric ideas. Some personal stories are in there, some random opinions. Sometimes she's really detailed. Other times she's extremely vague, saying
right.
things like, oh, we'll save $2 trillion by doing this, this, and this. And it doesn't ever explain what those things are, just broad ideas like getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's not an easy thing to spell out the entire plan. So this is a very simplified version of it. But before we get even to that, I want to just really quickly read her sort of setup to this, the problems of it, because it's really astounding in light of the previous presidential administration. She says here, here's where we're at today. Between 2013 and 2016, which let's remember, is the last 4 years of the Obama administration, the number one reason families went broke was because of health care, even though 91.2% of Americans had health insurance in 2016. Families are getting crushed by health costs. Just look at the numbers. Then she goes through and she talks about how expensive health insurance is. Well, that's really interesting.
Right.
Because I thought Obamacare, which was passed in 2010, 9 years ago, was supposed to solve all these problems. That's what they were all promising us back then, right?
Right.
So that's interesting that's what happened. $12,378. That's how much an average family of four with employer-sponsored insurance personally spent per year on employee premium contributions and out-of-pocket costs in 2018. And this figure has increased each year. Well, that's astounding. Yes, health insurance is really expensive. Premiums and deductibles have actually doubled since Obamacare went into effect. So it's interesting. She's being very critical of the current state of the health insurance industry, and yet that is a result in large part of Obamacare. 87 million. That's how many American adults in 2018 were uninsured or underinsured, meaning either they have no insurance or, quote, their so-called health insurance is like a car with the engine missing. Well, that sounds like Obamacare. So Obamacare, I guess, is the health insurance with a car that's like a car with the engine missing. It looks fine sitting on the lot, she says, but is inadequate if they actually need to use it. This is what I've been saying about Obamacare for years years and years. You can have health insurance, but if you can't afford to pay the high deductibles, it doesn't matter if you have health insurance. So anyway, she talks about all of these problems with the health insurance industry, how expensive it is, how expensive health insurance is in general, the cost of drugs and all of that stuff. She blames it on lobbyists. She never talks about Obamacare. I don't think it's mentioned in here one time. She talks about lobbyists and how they're buying everybody off, and health insurance companies and greedy millionaires and billionaires and all the typical stuff that you hear from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So what is her plan? This is her plan, basically. She says what she wants to do is create a Medicare for all option where you're going to eliminate private health insurance. Everybody gets full health coverage and coverage for long-term care. She says here, everybody gets the doctors and treatments they need when they need them. No more restrictive provider networks. No more insurance companies denying coverage for prescribed treatments. No more going broke over medical bills. No more premiums. No more out-of-pocket expenses. No more co-pays. All that's gone. All you do is you just go to the doctor and the bill is covered by the government.
Sounds pretty good.
Sounds pretty good so far, right? So the question is, how do you pay for something like this? Okay, that's obviously the big question. How do you pay for this? So the total cost of the plan, not just new spending, but existing spending. So the total cost of the plan is $52 trillion. $52 trillion. It would make it the most expensive thing the federal government has ever spent money on ever in the history of the United States of America.
Right.
Our current national debt right now is $22 trillion. So this is more than double our current national debt. And this is just over 10 years, the $52 trillion. It gets progressively more expensive as time goes on because healthcare gets more expensive as time goes on, and there are more people as time goes on. So obviously it will cost more than $52 trillion in the second 10-year period. Now, she claims the primary way that we're going to spend this, pay for this, is it's going to be about, she recognizes that it could cost $34 trillion in new cost and new spending over 10 years, $34 trillion. But she says that you're going to be able to offset a lot of that by forcing your employer, if you have employer-sponsored health insurance, your employer, every single employer in the country, except for small businesses, and we'll get to that in a second, but every single employer in the country who's paying for health insurance right now is going to continue paying whatever they're paying right now, almost exactly the same amount, a tiny bit less than what they're paying right now, except instead of paying it to a health insurance company, they're going to pay it to the federal government. So they're going to send all that money in new taxes to the federal government. I was
just going to say, so that's just straight up new taxes.
It's just straight up new taxes. That's a huge amount of money, trillions and trillions of dollars. It just goes immediately to the federal government. The state governments are spending all this money on Medicaid. They spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year on Medicaid. All that money is going to go straight to the federal government. So they're going to be required to continue paying that same money, even though Medicaid is going to disappear. You're not going to need Medicaid anymore. They're going to continue paying the money they're paying now, but now they're going to pay it to the federal government. Okay, so all this money goes into the hands of the federal government. Now, even with all of this, it doesn't really come close to paying for the cost of single-payer healthcare. So the biggest way that they're going to offset the expenses, the new expenses, are and those are big chunks of it. But the biggest way that they're going to make up the difference is going to be to basically ration care. That's what it comes down to. According to her plan, she is going to, says right here, this is a direct quote, "Under my approach, Medicare for all will sharply reduce administrative spending," because of course you're not going to have administrative costs anymore. The federal government is going to have all those costs. You're not going to have it in-house. And reimburse physicians and other non-hospital providers at current Medicare rates. So this is maybe the most important part of this whole plan. She says, "My plan will also rebalance rates in a budget neutral way that increases reimbursements for primary care providers and lowers reimbursements for, quote, overpaid specialties." So overpaid specialties are your heart surgeons, neurosurgeons, your expert physicians, the people who are not just your primary care doctor that you go when you have when you have the flu or you need shots or something like that.
Surely she gets to define who's overpaid too.
Absolutely. She gets to define who's overpaid without question. So what people need to understand is the way the system works right now. If you are on Medicare or Medicaid and you go to the hospital or you go to a doctor, Medicare or Medicaid reimburses those hospitals or doctors about 90 cents. It's actually less than 90 cents on the dollar. So they lose money on Medicare and Medicaid patients. They lose more money on Medicaid patients than Medicare patients, but they lose money on both. So what this is going to do is it's going to increase Medicare reimbursement rates slightly, so that you're not losing money. You're now basically breaking even. But now you're not going to get any of the money that you get from the private health insurance companies. If you go to the doctor with the private health insurance, and you pay using that, the doctor usually gets about $1.40 for every dollar that they spend on average. So they're making their money on private health insurance. Now they're not going to be making money on private health insurance because it's not going to exist. And the government is not going to cost them money. It's now basically going to cause them to break even. So what's going to happen is healthcare spending is going to be dramatically reduced over time from what it would otherwise be, because they're going to basically force physicians, force hospitals, force providers of every kind to take a lot less money than what they're getting now. So it's basically rationing. That's what we're talking about here, is healthcare rationing.
Right.
In some cases, it just means pay cuts for doctors, which is particularly problematic for me since my wife is a doctor.
Yeah.
But it's going to be pay cuts and it's going to be reduced care. That's what you're going to end up having. Now, she talks about this a little later on, because she talks about one of the biggest problems. One of the ways that we're going to be able to afford this plan is by bringing healthcare costs under control over a long period of time. That's part of the savings that's going to help pay this $34 trillion cost. And the way that she comes up with that is by tying total healthcare costs to GDP growth, so that total healthcare spending or healthcare costs are not going to surpass GDP growth from, I think, the previous year, although it could be several years, I guess. She could do it that way. So she's going to keep healthcare costs under control by tying it to GDP growth. That's just another way of rationing care. So a lot of the cost control here that's going to exist is going to be, as a result, she's going to pay for this plan using rationing. That's the primary thing. Now, Bernie Sanders and other people, there's been lots of speculation about how they would pay for their plans. A lot of people have speculated they're going to pay for it using taxes. There's going to be some sort of tax increase on the middle class. In fact, Bernie Sanders even said the middle class is going to have a tax increase. He says that tax increase is going to be outweighed by the cost savings they're going to get, which I don't believe is true, by the way, but that's what he claims. But he admitted there would be tax increases. Elizabeth Warren is saying no tax increases for the middle class. The way she's going to pay for this is primarily through cost control and rationing. Now, she also wants to do this for drugs, not just for providing healthcare services, not just for doctors and hospitals, but also for drugs. Basically, her plan is going to be to reduce the cost of name brand prescription drugs by 70%, which is pretty incredible, because it costs billions of dollars to create a new drug.
Yeah, right.
And 10 years, so it's very expensive to create new drugs. She's going to decrease that by 70%, and I think generics was by 30%. And how is she going to do this? Basically by bullying these companies to lower their rates, by saying, we're going to negotiate new prices. We're the government pays for basically everything now, so we're going to negotiate new rates. Now, what happens if the pharmaceutical company says, we don't want your crap deal, we're going to just sell it to people who don't have insurance, we're just willing to pay for it out of pocket. We're not going to do, lower our rates in line with what Elizabeth Warren thinks is a good rate. Well, she said if companies do that, we're going to punish them by taking away their patents, or by maybe, if we don't want to take away their patents, we will heavily subsidize the drug companies we do like, and will withhold money from the drug companies that we don't like. That's her plan for controlling drug costs. So again, just another form of rationing in some sense, because how is a drug company supposed to make a new drug if they're getting 70% less than they were before on their new drug, brand name drug that they're selling right now, or 30% on their generics. So lots and lots of cost cutting here.
Well,
all of that's going to lead to rationing.
That's a big point though, right there about like the drug companies. And I know that everyone wants to like take on the drug companies because whatever. But like that idea, like these trillion-dollar companies, I don't know how big they are, but when they're doing like these calculations and the math of like, all right, are we going to be able to edge out a profit if we drop all of this money into this potential product, make sure it works, go through the 15 years that it takes to go through the FDA and all of this, and then they get a whiff that a politician could theoretically just pull away their copyright or whatever at any moment, then maybe they factor that in, and maybe they're less likely to drop a whole bunch of money into a potential product, So it's like the chilling effect of just like the proposal of this, I think, has some deep ramifications. It's pretty wild.
Right. So these pharmaceutical companies are worth billions of dollars in many cases. They spend on average, I think it's $2.9 billion, and I think it's 10 years to introduce a new drug from the lab to the marketplace. $2.9 billion. So they're spending tons of money. To create a new drug is a huge, huge investment. And then, of course, you run the risk of, well, maybe you get this drug approved by the FDA, and then it turns out you've got a drug that causes other problems down the road, and you have to deal with all these multi-million-dollar lawsuits and everything else. You're seeing this with opioid companies now. Pharmaceutical companies that were producing opioids are now, even though the FDA approved all those drugs, they're now being sued. They're being blamed for all sorts of problems. Maybe they're to blame for some of those things. Maybe they're not. That's for courts to decide. But the point is, you have to worry about those legal ramifications down the road as well. So there's additional costs for some of the pharmaceutical products that you're producing. It's very, very, very expensive. This is just to produce the drug. Then you have to spend huge amounts of money to market it, to get it in the hands of physicians, to put television commercials together, all of that stuff. You're spending all kinds of money to do that as well. So this is an extremely expensive industry. Yeah, extremely expensive.
And let me be clear, like I'm not trying to like play a fiddle or whatever, like a woe is me massive pharmaceutical company or anything like that. Right? Like right. I'm not trying to get sympathy or anything for that. What I'm really worried about is the idea of stifling innovation. This sounds great. Oh yeah, we want to make drugs cheaper. That's fantastic. But I feel like they just have such a short-term view of this. And if this idea stifles potentially new life-saving drugs from occurring in the future, it's like that's not taken into account with this.
Right. And that's the thing that most people don't understand. She likes to talk a lot about how you can buy these drugs. Like, for instance, she says here in her plan, the price of insulin is skyrocketed, forcing people to risk their lives by rationing, which is hilarious because she's calling for tons of rationing in this proposal. But anyway, and as prices continue to rise, more Americans are turning to Canada in search of affordable prices. And she talks in here about how you can buy drugs for a lot less in a lot of other countries than you can in the United States. And that's true. But the reason for that is largely because the drug companies are producing the drugs here in the United States because they get all of this patent protection and other legal protections. And this is the place in the world where you can make the most money on drugs. And it's the place in the world where you have the best educational institutions and the best trained scientists that produce these drugs and all of that. This is the place where most people want to live who are in that industry, right? That's why they're producing them here. They're not producing those drugs in Canada. They're not producing those drugs in Scandinavia. They don't produce drugs over there. Most of the innovative breakthrough drugs and technologies are produced here in the United States, and the profit motive is a big part of that. Mm-hmm. If you take that away, then the drug company is going to do what many other companies in the United States have done. They're going to leave. And they're going to go someplace else. And they're going to realize, you know what? Maybe we can produce drugs in Belize. And maybe Belize will give us a deal to produce drugs there and bring all this money and industry over to Belize. They'll find a place to do it. They don't have to produce the drugs here in the United States. They could just produce them someplace else. So why are drugs so cheap in Canada? Because Americans are subsidizing innovative drugs for the entire world, including Canada. That's a big part of the problem. If you take that away from the United States, then we're not going to produce those innovative drugs here. We just won't produce them at all, or they'll produce them in some other country. It's really scary. I mean, the rationing, people need to understand this. She's talking about trillions of dollars of rationing.
Right.
She calls it healthcare savings, that we're wasting money, that this is all just a waste of money, and we could just cut out that waste. But they make that claim all the time. And the reality is they don't cut out waste. Giant bureaucracies, by definition, waste money.
Yeah.
Like, that's what bureaucracies do.
Right.
It's an essential part of being a bureaucracy. They all waste money. So I'm supposed to believe that the same people that can't run virtually anything effectively are going to be able to manage a multi-trillion-dollar enterprise here, that they're going to be able to control the healthcare industry, the entire healthcare industry, that the geniuses that can't run the Postal Service or Amtrak effectively, they lose billions of dollars on those things. They're going to be able to manage the healthcare industry better than the people who've been doing it for decades and decades and decades. Give me a break.
Which is like a sixth of our economy. They're just
right.
let's just public that.
Let's just take over a sixth of the economy. That's what she's essentially saying. And if they don't do the things I like, then I'll just punish them by taking away their legal protections, their patent rights, the promise, the contract, the contractual promises that the government has been making to these people that they've been relying on for decades. Let's just take that away from them then as a punishment. I mean, this is really, really egregious, in a lot of ways immoral in that particular case. You have whole industries being destroyed. Another thing that's interesting about this is although health insurance companies are, there are a lot of problems with the health insurance industry. I'll be the first one to admit that. We need to completely overhaul and change the healthcare system that we have in this country and move to a system that cuts out health insurance companies when you're talking about relationships with primary care doctors. So we support direct primary care at the Heartland Institute. There are a lot of things that we can do to reduce healthcare costs and make health insurance more affordable. Okay, I'm not saying health insurance companies do everything the right way, but she's talking about destroying an industry that employs thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And she's talking about just destroying it overnight, like it's nothing. And all those people are out of jobs. What do those people all do? I mean, she doesn't seem to care about that at all. There's no mention of what do you do with all of these people who are going to lose their jobs, these thousands and tens of thousands of families in industries related to the health insurance industry, all losing their jobs. The thousands of people thousands and thousands and thousands of families that are going to lose their jobs when the hospital has to reduce its costs by 30%. What are they supposed to do then when they have to reduce their costs by 30%? They're just going to lay people off, or they're going to have to find a way to cut costs somehow. So this is going to create huge disruptions in the healthcare space, but also in the economy as a whole. And it's going to give the government significant amounts of power over our daily lives, because if they're paying for your healthcare, then they get to decide what you eat. They get to decide what you put in your body, how you live your life, whether you're exercising enough or not exercising enough. They get to decide whether they're going to change the tax code to incentivize people to behave in a certain way that they think would benefit the healthcare system. Yep. This is going to open the door to all kinds of government control. And on top of it, it's going to make the healthcare system significantly worse through rationing and disincentivize really intelligent, bright people from becoming specialists and becoming doctors and taking on all of that healthcare debt, going to medical school debt and all of that stuff, hundreds of thousands of dollars in many cases. Why would they do that if they can't make the money back and can't earn a living? So this is a huge, huge, huge disaster. I know it sounds good on the surface, but this would be a nightmare if this actually happens.
Yes, and we'll definitely be on the front lines of that nightmare, either talking about it or combating against it from here on out. So we'll definitely keep you posted when it comes to these terrible ideas and others from our presidential candidates and eventual nominee as well. We don't have time for our last topic. We went long on this and the Halloween topic. But I do want to mention, I don't think you guys mentioned this. If you did, feel free to cut me off here. But there was an update to our Democratic nomination presidential pool last week. Tim Ryan.
I don't think we... Oh, Tim Ryan? Really?
Tim Ryan dropped out, which I believe was Isaac's 4th round pick. So now I am in first place officially with you and Jim right behind me. Andy is far in last place. Isaac is second to last. However, my team is looking very shaky. Very shaky. Julian Castro, he announced that like if he doesn't raise a certain amount of money by the end of the month, which was yesterday, that his campaign was going to be ended. So I haven't Googled that since yesterday. So hopefully he's still in there. And Kamala Harris, apparently her campaign is just falling apart and they're restructuring and all of that. She was my first round pick. So I'm very concerned about that. And then as we described a couple of weeks ago, Wayne Messam raised $5 last quarter. So his campaign isn't doing too well either. So it's basically all of these people, with the exception of Andrew Yang, is not doing too well. So I don't know how long I'm going to be sitting in first place here.
You got to think though that some of those people are at least going to stay in through the first couple of primaries.
Maybe
you have to think Kamala Harris will be in there through New Hampshire.
So the way that we drafted, right? We drafted in pretty much like a straight line of who has the most support, popularity, who has the most likely chance of being elected, right? Straight line, with the Bidens and the Bernie Sanders and the Elizabeth Warrens being taken like 1, 2, 3, all the way down through your kind of second tier people that are still in there or whatever, all the way down to the last place people that like the Marianne Williamsons or whatever, right? It was pretty much, that's how we drafted. But I think like as we were going through this, there seems to be like the way that these people stay in the race isn't a straight line. There's kind of a dip in the middle. So you've got like the people that are obviously the front runners who are going to stay in because there's no reason for them to get out. And then the people on the bottom who aren't having any support, but they're going to stay in because they get some name recognition. You know, Wayne Messam raised $5. Who cares? He doesn't actually think that he's going to win. But in the middle, you had those people that thought, maybe if I strike a chord, that we could really launch our campaign and actually get some traction in Iowa and New Hampshire or whatever. And but then when that doesn't happen, then they drop out. So I think what we're seeing here, instead of if it was just, you know, if people were dropping out in the kind of the logical manner that we drafted them in, we would see only 4th and 5th round people dropping out. But what we're seeing is like all these middle 3rd round people that we drafted are actually the ones that are dropping out. And that's what makes me concerned, that the Julian Castros and the Kamala Harris was kind of in the top part, but I don't know.
She was, yeah.
It kind
She's
of
fallen out.
She's fallen out. She's definitely in that middle section, and that middle section I think is the most likely to drop out. So
I don't know about that entirely. I think it depends on how expensive the operation is. You know, I think like Beto, right?
He's a middle guy.
He's in big trouble. Tulsi Gabbard, you would think, is
right.
in pretty bad shape.
Mm-hmm.
I think those people are kind of at the end now, aren't they? Are they even really in the middle group? I don't know about that.
Yeah,
I think the middle group is basically Yang, Harris, Mayor Pete.
Yeah,
I kind of think that's the middle group.
Right, but I could see them dropping out earlier than the Wayne Messams or the Marianne Williamsons or the John Delaney's. You know, like those people don't seem like they're ever getting out.
You are right in the sense that it's a lot of it has to do with cost. So the Kamala Harris campaign is spending a lot more money than, you know, the Julian Castro campaign or whatever.
Yeah.
And because of that, she is at greater risk of having to stop it earlier if it's not working out, or significantly cutting back her costs. And so, yeah, I mean, there's no question about it. Look, this looks like it's going to be a 3-person race, and it's looked that way for a while. It seems like that isn't going to change. It's Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. Yeah. That's what it comes down to.
Right.
And it's hard to imagine Bernie Sanders winning at this point, which really makes me sad because he was my first round pick.
Go to Joe 30330 and pledge now.
Yeah.
And you can help him win. Oh,
right.
Joe. Oh, Joe. All right. We are way over time. Thank you, audience, for tuning in. Tune in every Friday for a new episode of the In the Tank podcast. If you like our show, please subscribe. Write a review for us on iTunes. We'd greatly appreciate it. You can also find us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, pretty much everything nowadays. If you'd like, you could follow us on Twitter at In the Tank Pod. If you want to send us your comments, suggestions, questions, anecdotes, jokes to the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
on Twitter and Facebook at Justin T. Haskins.
Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you next week.